Hello and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to untangle a real geopolitical puzzle. We're connecting the dots between a high-stakes presidential summit up in Alaska and, well, some pretty sudden, painful economic consequences for India. How do those two things possibly connect? Let's get into it. Okay, so let's break this down. You've got these two major headlines hitting at roughly the same time. On one side, you have President Trump and President Putin meeting for the first time in 6 years to talk about the war in Ukraine. A huge deal. And then, thousands of miles away, India gets slammed with these massive new tariffs. You'd be forgiven for thinking, okay, two totally separate stories, right? But what if I told you they aren't separate at all? That these headlines are actually two sides of the very same coin, and that those tariffs on India weren't random, but were a calculated move, a secret ingredient, if you will, in a much, much larger global strategy. Yeah, let's uncover the inside story here. All right, so first, let's set the stage. You have this really historic meeting happening in Alaska between the American and Russian presidents, and the official story, the one everyone was told, was that this was all about finding a path to a ceasefire to finally end that devastating, long-running war in Ukraine. But at the exact same time all this is taking shape, on the other side of the planet, India is getting absolutely rocked by an economic bombshell. Washington imposes these crippling new tariffs, bringing the total rate to a staggering 50%. I mean, that instantly makes India one of the most heavily tariffed countries in the entire world. And look, this wasn't some small surgical strike on one little industry. Oh no, the impact was incredibly broad, hitting the very engines of the Indian economy. We're talking textiles, steel, pharmaceuticals, auto parts, even the IT sector. This was a move designed to apply maximum pressure. So you have to ask, why? The official reason given by the Trump administration for these tariffs, well, at first glance, it seems pretty direct. It's all about following the money. And, just a super quick refresher for anyone who needs it, a tariff is basically a tax on stuff being imported into a country. The whole point is to make those foreign goods more expensive, discourage people from buying them, and, in a case like this, send a very clear and very costly political message. So the official U.S. logic was laid out in a pretty simple three-step argument. First, India was buying huge amounts of discounted Russian oil. Second, the U.S. claimed that money was going directly into Russia's war chest to fund the fighting in Ukraine. And therefore, third, the tariffs were a punishment to force India to cut those financial ties. Makes sense, right? Well, the sources suggest this was really just the cover story for a much deeper geopolitical game. And this is where that official story really starts to unravel. Because it turns out, India wasn't just collateral damage in this conflict. No, it was actually a central piece of the U.S. strategy, a secret factor, if you will, designed specifically to force Vladimir Putin's hand. This is the key. A pretty stunning and direct admission from President Trump himself. He stated it plainly. The tariffs weren't just about punishing India for buying oil. They were a tool specifically used to get Putin to agree to that summit in Alaska. Wow. So their real strategy here was to basically weaponize India's economy against Russia. I mean, think about it. India is Russia's second biggest oil customer. Any economic pain you inflict on India is going to indirectly hit Moscow's revenue stream. The U.S. was hoping to weaken Putin's bargaining position before he even sat down at the table. And this wasn't just a presidential boast either. Top officials, like U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, they confirmed it. He stated that the tariffs on India were a necessary part of the broader strategy to apply pressure on Putin and bring him to the summit. So there you have it. India was, in effect, a pawn in a superpower chess game. But here's the thing. Using a major partner like India as leverage is an incredibly risky gamble. And a lot of analysts warned that this high-stakes strategy could have massive unintended consequences that could really backfire on the United States. You had people like former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton calling the move an enormous mistake. He argued that by treating India this way, the U.S. risked unraveling decades of diplomatic investment, all that work aimed at bringing the two countries closer, especially as a counterweight to China. And when you look at the stated goals versus the potential outcomes, the danger becomes crystal clear. The goal was to isolate Russia, but the policy could actually end up pushing India, Russia, and China closer together. The goal was to contain China's influence, but it could strengthen anti-U.S. blocs like BRICS. And in the process of trying to end one war, the U.S. risked severely damaging its vital strategic partnership with India. So, after all this strategic maneuvering, after India paid a heavy economic price, what was the actual results of the Trump-Putin summit? Did the high-risk gamble even pay off? In short, no. The summit, which lasted 3 hours, ended in failure. There was no breakthrough, no ceasefire agreement, and no resolution to the war in Ukraine. The entire strategic premise of the tariffs just fell flat. And this leaves India in an incredibly precarious position. The threat of even tougher tariffs is still hanging in the air. After taking a significant economic hit for a strategy that failed, India then had to watch Putin warmly invite Trump to Moscow. So now India is caught in this diplomatic vice, forced to balance its critical energy needs against immense pressure from a global superpower. Ultimately, this was never just about oil prices or trade policy. For India, it became a harsh lesson in modern geopolitics. The country was used as a tool in a conflict between two other powers, and when the strategy failed, it was left to navigate the fallout. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. When the giants clash, how does a rising power like India avoid becoming just a pawn on the board, and instead become a player in its own right?